Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into a genuinely fascinating investigative expose that challenges a massive historical narrative. For centuries, a very specific story has dominated how we understand the spread of religion in West Africa. But as we unpack our source material today, we're going to see how that history is actually deeply entangled in colonial-era justifications. Our text aims to explain all the information, skip absolutely no details, and really expose the truth based entirely on the historical and archaeological record. Let's get right into it. So here's the central mystery we need to tackle right out of the gate. Did Islam conquer West Africa by the sword? It's a super common trope, often rooted in Orientalist views, that Islam was forced upon the kingdoms of ancient Ghana, Mali, and Songhai through violent conquest. Our source material asks a simple question: is that actually what happened? Here is our roadmap for today. First, the great historical fallacy. Second, trade, not the sword. Third, the major West African empires. Fourth, becoming an indigenous faith. And finally, the colonial imposition. Part 1. The Great Historical Fallacy, debunking the myth of violent Islamic conquest in the Ghana Empire. According to the source, the claim that Islam spread through the ancient Ghana Empire, which was also known as Ouagadougou, by the sword, it completely lacks archaeological and textual evidence. The Empire of Ghana was, fundamentally, a powerhouse trading state. Its wealth and power were built on controlling the massive trans-Saharan trade routes. They literally connected the goldfields of the south with the salt and markets of North Africa. And here's the kicker. The primary carriers of Islam into this region were not Arab armies. They were Berber and Mande-speaking traders known as the Jula. They brought their faith with them for commerce, not for conquest. They literally just wanted to trade. Now, you have to hear about this famous 1067 CEA account by the Andalusian geographer El-Bakri because it provides definitive proof of peaceful religious coexistence. Picture this, a segregated capital city called Kumisale. On one side, you have the Muslim town, filled with Arab and Berber merchants, multiple mosques, and Islamic scholars. And exactly 6 miles away was the royal town, where the king of Ghana and his court lived, practicing their traditional Soninke religion. The Ghanaian kings clearly saw the economic benefit of these traders. They gave them safe passage and let them practice freely. The text points out that this physical, deliberate separation proves the local population absolutely wasn't being forced to convert. Part 2. Trade, not the sword. Gradual, organic integration through commerce. Moving right along to Part 3, the major West African empires, the pattern of peaceful spread across kingdoms. If we trace this chronological timeline, we see the rise of some truly powerful indigenous empires, from the House of City-States and Kanem-Bornu around 1000 CE to the legendary Mali Empire rising around 1235 CE, all the way to the Songhai Empire in 1464. What the historical record shows us here is an enduring, centuries-long timeline of Islamic integration, and it simply replicated and amplified that peaceful model we just saw established in ancient Ghana. Let's break down exactly how each of these unique empires adopted Islam peacefully, because it's like a giant puzzle coming together. Under the incredibly devout Mansa Musa of Mali, Islam was a cosmopolitan, elite faith. He wasn't launching jihads against his subjects. Instead, he used his immense wealth from his famous 1324 pilgrimage to patronize scholarship. He essentially turned Timbuktu into a world-renowned intellectual hub. Over in Songhai, leaders like Sunni Ali blended Islamic practices with traditional beliefs, a highly syncretic approach. Down in Kanem-Bornu, the Saifoa dynasty adopted Islam as a strategic alliance to connect with North African trade networks. In the House of City-States, it was the Wangara traders who built commercial centers and facilitated the gradual conversion of rulers. And finally, in the Wall of Kingdoms of modern Senegal, we see the rise of the marabouts. These were Muslim clerics whose spiritual influence attracted converts and actually counterbalanced the power of secular kings. So in every single case, what do we see? Commerce, strategic alliances, and intellectual exchange. Now, to be fully thorough, we have to address the exception that proves the rule. Some people might point to the 19th century jihads across West Africa, like those led by Ousmane Den Fodio. But our source material is very clear here. These were reform movements. They were led by Muslim scholars against nominally Muslim rulers who were accused of unjust taxation and mixing Islam with pagan practices. So the crucial takeaway is that these were internal movements for orthodox purification. They were not wars to force conversion on non-Muslim masses. And they occurred a literal millennium after Islam first arrived, which just further proves that the initial massive spread was entirely peaceful. Part 4. Becoming an indigenous faith. A millennia of organic integration. So why does over 1,000 years of this organic integration matter? To understand this and why it challenges a lot of modern assumptions, we need to look at how the source defines the word indigeneity. According to the document, indigeneity refers to the length, depth, and manner of a religion's integration into the cultural and social fabric of a region, completely independent of external political domination. This definition grounds the core argument of our investigation today, that Islam is actually more historically indigenous to nations like Ghana, Mali, and Senegal than Christianity is. Our text highlights the specific, frankly fascinating ways West Africans actively embraced and Africanized Islam. They weren't just passive recipients. They adapted Arabic script for local languages like Hausa and Wolof, creating the Ajami script. They developed the incredible Sudano-Sahelian mud brick architecture. Think of the Great Mosque of Djeneri. It's an entirely African interpretation of Islamic design. The religion was also deeply influenced by Sufism, which resonated perfectly with existing local beliefs in spiritual power. And crucially, it spread largely without foreign imperial backing. There was no Arab or Ottoman conquest here. Plus, the Maliki school of jurisprudence was incredibly flexible, adapting seamlessly to local customs and land tenure systems. It truly deeply became part of their ancestral heritage. Part 5. The Colonial Imposition, Christianity, Colonialism, and the Violent Creation of a New Order. To truly understand the religious landscape of West Africa, the source pivots to the starkly contrasting reality of how Christianity was introduced to much of the region. The arrival of Christianity was inextricably linked to European colonialism. This quote directly illustrates the colonial civilizing mission detailed in our source. European missionaries established schools and clinics, yes, but the primary goal was creating a new class of Western-educated Africans. The text argues this ideology was based on a racial hierarchy that deliberately undermined traditional African beliefs and Islamic scholarship, framing them as backward. Conversion, in this context, was a form of cultural imperialism. The text argues this religious imposition went hand in hand with political subjugation. At the Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885, European powers quite literally carved up the continent. They drew artificial borders with absolute disregard for the existing ethnic, linguistic, or religious boundaries that we just spent the first half of this explainer exploring. The source details how this arbitrary colonial imposition dismantled sovereign indigenous political systems and forced rival groups into the same territories. It left a legacy of division that continues to cause instability today. And we absolutely cannot skip the realities of how this colonial control was exerted. The document details highly documented, devastating atrocities tied to this era. In German Southwest Africa, the Herero and Nama genocide saw upwards of 90,000 people systematically exterminated. In King Leopold II's Congo Free State, an estimated 10 million died through a brutal forced labor system where missionaries frequently accompanied the expeditions. In Portuguese colonies, the assimilado system coerced Africans to adopt Christianity just to gain basic legal rights. And across the board, there was widespread cultural destruction, demonizing local deities and actively destroying sacred shrines to force a European worldview. So the crucial point laid out in our source material is visualized in this stark contrast. Equating these two historical processes fundamentally misunderstands the history of West Africa. On one hand, the text shows the spread of Islam was a centuries-long, deeply organic handshake of commerce, scholarship, and local agency. On the other hand, the introduction of Christianity to the specific region was, historically speaking, accompanied by the barrel of a gun, imposed through a system of artificial borders, exploitation, and coercion. Which leaves us with a profound question to reflect on. How does uncovering this historical truth change the way we view modern African borders and religious identity today? When we look at the actual evidence presented in the text, the landscape looks entirely different, doesn't it? It challenges us to question the historical narratives we've been handed and to keep digging for the truth. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Stay curious, and I'll see you next time.